July 15, 1944, north of St. Lo, France. AOG-88 reconnaissance bomber rides the thermals above the bocage, engines droning through hot layered air that smells of oil and summer dust. Through the slit of his RB camera, the Luftwaffe pilot measures angles and light. Hedgerows carved into chessboard fields, lanes shimmering, and there rows of Sherman silhouettes parked in disciplined files, canvas tarpaulins winking as sun slides across their curves. From this height, the scene reads like order of battle. Fuel lorries at the hedgerow gap, field kitchens smoking, what look like 105mm howitzers spaced in clean arcs. He thumbs the trigger, frame after frame. The shutter's insect click swallowed by the engine's steady thrum. By the next morning, the film sits in a cool Berlin room where photo interpreters bend over light tables, rulers and grease pencils drawing truth from silver grain. At first glance, the verdict seems simple: fresh armor gathering behind the Norman front. Then small doubts accumulate, tracks too few for so many tons of steel, wheel marks repeating like stencils, shadows that soften instead of harden at midday, no exhaust heat bloom where engines should have coughed the air thin. Our senior analyst circles 3 fields and writes a single word in the margin: shine decoy, then adds a cautious note that contradicts his own hesitation. If even a portion is real, reinforcements may be massing. Across July, those cautious notes echo upward. Reports double-checked and contested still urge restraint. 15th Army clings to the Pas de Calais, while Normandy bleeds. What the lens captured was not an armored division, but air, canvas, rubber, and nerve. Fortitude South's logic made visible. The deception worked because the details obeyed an army's grammar, even as they lied about its presence, shaping movements without firing a shot. To understand how such ghosts learned to stand so convincingly in daylight, we have to return to where they were first imagined, in Britain's workshops, labs, and backlots where illusion was engineered into a weapon. September 1939, Britain stood under a darkening sky as Luftwaffe bombers crossed the Channel for their first probing raids. Sirens wailed across London, and from the ramparts of Farnham Castle in Surrey, a small group of men and women looked not toward the heavens for defense, but toward the ground for illusion. The Royal Engineers Camouflage Development and Training Centre had been born, an unlikely sanctuary where soldiers shared tables with painters, sculptors, and theatre magicians. Their task was as strange as it was urgent: to make the visible vanish and the ordinary appear formidable. Among them was Jasper Maskelyne, the celebrated stage illusionist whose family had spent generations mastering the art of deception. Maskelyne believed the battlefield could be treated like a stage, where smoke, paint, and shadow could save lives. "If I can hide a rabbit," he reportedly declared, "I can hide a tank." By 1940, the experiment moved from Britain's green fields to the deserts of North Africa, where Rommel's Afrika Korps stalked the British 8th Army. Here illusion met necessity. Under the blistering sun, carpenters and artists erected skeleton frames of wood, draped them with canvas, and painted them to gleam like steel. Real tanks were disguised as trucks, while dummy vehicles multiplied overnight, entire armored brigades appearing where there were none. Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilots returned to their bases with photographs that seemed undeniable. Hundreds of tanks glinting in the desert heat. Each false shadow forced the Germans to waste fuel, sorties, and time-verifying phantoms that melted into mirage. These early experiments proved that deception was not just a trick, it was a strategy. A single fake division could redirect entire armies, alter supply routes, and buy days of survival. The lesson traveled quickly. British camouflage officers began training American engineers, blending the precision of military logistics with the flair of show business. What had begun in Farnham Castle soon crossed the Atlantic, where it would evolve into the most sophisticated deception force the world had ever seen. A ghost army capable of reshaping the very geography of war. February 1944, somewhere in southern England. Mist rolled low over a farmer's field recently requisitioned by the US Army. Beneath the fog, 4 men worked quickly, unrolling what looked like an enormous length of tarpaulin. Within half an hour, compressed air hissed through rubber valves, and from the flat earth rose the unmistakable silhouette of an M4 Sherman tank. It gleamed dully in the weak sunlight, its contours perfect, its rivets and turret seams hand-painted to catch the eye from above. Yet a single touch would have revealed the truth. It was lighter than a man's body. Made not of steel and armor but of vulcanized rubber, a creation of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Each inflatable Sherman weighed only 90 pounds, could be carried by 2 soldiers, and fully deployed in less than 30 minutes. Despite its fragility, the construction was rugged enough to endure England's unpredictable wind and rain, swaying slightly but never collapsing. Engineers soon discovered that realism depended on more than shape. It required environment. Dummy crews tramped around the site to stamp tank tracks into the mud. Buckets of oil were poured onto the ground to simulate leaks. Canvas fuel drums, plywood crates, and false radio aerials completed the scene. From low altitude, the deception became flawless. To an Abwehr analyst poring over reconnaissance photographs, the reflective pigments mimicking sunlit steel and the careful shadowing of gun barrels signaled authenticity. Where there was light, there appeared to be life. At night, the theater expanded. Loudspeakers hidden in hedgerows played the deep rumble of tank engines. Generators powered faint glows under tent flaps, as if crews were working by lamplight. Dummy radio units broadcast scripted transmissions, filling the airwaves with phantom conversations. By dawn, German intelligence files recorded fresh divisions arriving in southern England. What they didn't know was that these divisions breathed air, not diesel. The Allies had transformed deception into an art form. Rubber, air, and shadows combining to turn the empty fields of England into a vast, convincing mirage. October 1942, north of El Alamein, Egypt. The desert seemed endless and still, the horizon broken only by mirage and heat. Overhead, German reconnaissance planes carved wide circles in the sky, their cameras clicking steadily, capturing what appeared to be a vast build-up of British armor in the southern desert. Beneath them stretched 20 miles of freshly laid pipeline, its silver glint visible even through haze, and beyond it, hundreds of tanks and vehicles shimmering under the sun. To Rommel's staff at Panzer Army Africa, the message was unmistakable. Montgomery's 8th Army was preparing to strike from the south. What they could not see was that much of what the lenses captured was made of canvas, wood, and cunning. The deception had been born in the imagination of Jasper Maskelyne's camouflage unit, a fusion of engineers, artists and illusionists who had spent months studying how to turn the desert itself into a stage. The pipeline was nothing but empty oil drums and painted pipes laid in the sand, its daily progress carefully faked to suggest preparations for an attack weeks away. Dummy tanks and trucks, wooden skeletons covered in canvas, stood in neat rows, their tracks pressed into the dust by soldiers dragging weighted boards. Each morning, fires were lit to mimic field kitchens. At night, dim lights glowed beneath tarpaulins where no crews existed. Meanwhile, the true 8th Army massed silently far to the north under camouflaged netting shaped like dunes and wadis. Engineers concealed artillery in wadis and tanks beneath woven mats that blended with the sand's pale tone. By the time Axis observers sent their reconnaissance photos back to headquarters, the illusion was complete. Rommel, convinced of a southern offensive, repositioned his forces accordingly. On the night of October 23, 1942, Montgomery shattered that illusion. The real attack thundered from the north, 1,000 guns firing in unison, tanks surging through the darkness under the cover of blinding artillery. The Axis lines buckled within hours, and by dawn the desert was filled with retreating vehicles and burning wrecks. The victory at El Alamein marked not just a turning point in the North African campaign, but a revelation. Deception could magnify strength, redirect entire armies, and win battles without firing a single false shot. The lesson would travel westward, to the beaches of Europe, where illusion would soon become the Allies' deadliest weapon. By late 1943, with victory in North Africa secured and the Mediterranean front stabilizing, Allied planners faced their greatest test: how to retake Western Europe without marching straight into annihilation. Every strategist knew that the key to D-Day was surprise, but surprise required invisibility. To storm France, the Allies would first have to blind Germany. Out of this necessity was born Operation Bodyguard, a grand tapestry of deceit woven across continents. Its purpose was simple in theory, yet vast in scope: to convince Hitler that when the invasion came, it would not strike Normandy, but Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. The illusion centered on a phantom, the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, commanded, at least on paper, by the famously aggressive General George S. Patton. To German intelligence, Patton was the embodiment of Allied offensive might, the one man they believed capable of leading a cross-channel assault, so Allied planners made him the star of their fiction. Across southeastern England, from Kent to Dover, empty fields filled with rubber Shermans, wooden trucks and fake landing craft built from canvas and timber. Roads were lined with dummy convoys that moved under cover of night, shifted by engineers to mimic the rotation of active divisions. Radio operators, trained to imitate the chatter of entire corps, filled the ether with thousands of false transmissions. Meanwhile in London, double agents such as Juan Pujol, Garcia, known to the Abwehr as Agent Garbo, fed Berlin a steady stream of carefully curated intelligence confirming that Patton's army was preparing to strike across the Strait of Dover. From the Luftwaffe's aerial photographs, the scene looked unquestionable. Massive troop build-ups, camps, fuel dumps, and endless rows of armor waiting for orders. As spring turned to early summer 1944, the deception held firm. Even when Allied ships began massing in the Channel and real paratroopers trained for Normandy, German intelligence clung to the illusion. Hitler himself was convinced that Normandy would be a diversion, a feint before the real blow at Calais. Operation Bodyguard had succeeded before the first soldier even set foot on French soil. The web of illusion was now complete, setting the stage for the greatest deception of the war, Operation Fortitude, January 1944, somewhere in the frozen fields of Maryland. An unmarked train rattled east toward a future that would never officially exist. On board sat men carrying sketchpads instead of rifles, paintbrushes beside carbines, and rolls of canvas stacked higher than ammunition crates. They were the newly formed 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so secret that even most generals knew it only by rumor. Their mission was audacious and absurd in equal measure, to conjure entire armies from nothing. When the orders were read, some laughed, thinking it a clerical mistake. But by spring, the 1 to 100 men of this strange battalion would be marching through Europe as phantoms, artists in uniform, fighting a war with rubber, sound, and imagination. They called themselves the Ghost Army. Drawn from art schools, ad agencies, and Hollywood studios, their recruits included painters from Pratt, architects from Yale, set designers from Paramount, and sound engineers from Bell Labs. Each brought a piece of civilian mastery repurposed for military illusion. Goodyear's inflatable M4 Shermans and 155mm howitzers became their tools of trade, light enough for 4 men to lift, yet convincing enough to fool Luftwaffe reconnaissance. Alongside these silent giants rolled sound trucks equipped with 500-pound speakers that could project recordings of engine noise, bridge construction, or tank columns up to 15 miles away. By day, engineers and artists built elaborate camps with dummy tents, fake kitchens, and even hung laundry to suggest weary troops. At night, radio operators mimicked divisional chatter down to the smallest procedural detail, creating electromagnetic ghosts for German intercept teams. Every illusion was tailored to deceive the enemy at close range, just miles from the real front. This was not grand strategy like Operation Fortitude. It was tactical sleight of hand, designed to draw artillery fire, mask withdrawals, and misdirect scouts who believed what their eyes confirmed. In the coming months, these illusions would be tested in the chaos of Normandy. As the beaches turned red and the fields of France filled with smoke, the Ghost Army would quietly unfold its canvas legions, buying precious hours and saving countless lives through deception so perfect it could only have been crafted by artists. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. Dawn broke in thunder and fire as Allied ships poured men and steel onto the beaches of Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. The roar of naval guns shook the surf, the air thick with salt, smoke, and cordite. Amid the chaos of real battle, another war unfolded in silence, a war of illusion. While American and British troops clawed for every yard of sand, the deception that had brought them there continued to breathe through the airwaves and into German command rooms hundreds of miles away. To Luftwaffe analysts peering at reconnaissance photos, the landings seemed incomplete, even feigned. Omaha and Utah, they argued, could not be the main thrust. Somewhere the real blow was yet to come, surely led by General Patton's phantom 1st U.S. Army Group, still waiting across from Calais. In truth, the illusion was now fully mobile. South of the invasion beaches near Saint-Lô and Caen, the Ghost Army began its first operations on continental soil. Within hours, open fields blossomed with hundreds of inflatable Shermans and half-tracks, their rubber forms glinting convincingly in the Normandy sun. Engineers dragged weighted boards to carve tank tracks into the damp earth, while sound trucks roamed the hedgerows, blasting the thunder of engines and the metallic grind of machinery. Radio operators broadcast scripted messages, suggesting entire armored divisions were maneuvering nearby. German observers, reading the signals, reacted precisely as planned. Artillery batteries pivoted toward empty fields, and Panzer battalions redeployed to counter ghosts. For weeks, the deception rippled through German command. The 15th Army, still massed near Pas-de-Calais, remained frozen in place, awaiting the attack that never came. Those lost 7 weeks gave the Allies what no general could have demanded: time. Time to reinforce, to push inland, and to trap the German 7th Army in the Falaise pocket, where the road to Paris finally opened. Normandy had proven it. Rubber, air, and whispers could steer the course of armies as surely as any weapon forged in steel. Mid-June 1944, Wunsdorf, south of Berlin. Deep inside the concrete corridors of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, maps covered every inch of the Situation Room walls. Fresh reconnaissance photos arrived hourly from the Luftwaffe, each strip of film examined under magnifying lamps by weary analysts searching for certainty amid chaos. What they saw appeared beyond dispute. Hundreds of armored vehicles, fuel dumps, and pontoon bridges crowding the English coast from Kent to Sussex. The invasion at Normandy, they concluded, could not be the main attack. It was far too small, too narrow in scope. The real storm, they told their superiors, would break across the Strait of Dover, where General George S. Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group still seemed poised for the decisive blow toward Calais. What the analysts did not know was that their most trusted sources had already been compromised. Dozens of Abwehr field agents operating in Britain were in reality double agents under MI5's control. Each first-hand report they sent, fuel convoys near Dover, tank engines warming in Kent, troop movements toward Maidstone, had been scripted in London to reinforce the illusion. Together with Luftwaffe photographs of rubber Shermans and wooden landing craft, these reports produced a flawless lie. Even the maps presented to Hitler in mid-June still showed phantom divisions massing opposite Calais, their supposed logistics traced in neat red pencil lines. Some Luftwaffe photo interpreters began to sense the deception. They noticed the identical angles of tank shadows, the absence of tire ruts, the repetition of identical vehicles across separate fields. But skepticism never reached the top. Hitler's unwavering faith in Patton as the Allies' supreme field commander and his growing distrust of his own generals cemented the illusion. Divisions that could have crushed the Normandy bridgehead stayed frozen in Calais, waiting for ghosts. By the time the truth dawned, Allied tanks were already driving through liberated towns toward Paris. One captured German officer would later admit bitterly, "We prepared to fight an army of ghosts and lost to one made of men." By the summer of 1944, the Allied deception campaign had grown into a full-fledged industry. An invisible war fought not in trenches or skies, but in workshops and design rooms. In Britain, the once quiet spa town of Leamington Spa had transformed into a factory of illusion. Inside converted warehouses, teams of carpenters, painters, and engineers worked around the clock assembling dummy aircraft, landing craft, and tanks. They operated with the same urgency as any munitions line, producing hundreds of decoys destined for airfields, ports, and coastal staging grounds. From a distance, the shapes on the tarmac and the silhouettes in the estuaries looked entirely real. Rows of Spitfires gleaming under camouflage netting, wooden landing craft bobbing along the Thames estuary, their steel hulls painted with deceptive precision. Across the Atlantic, American industry took deception to mass production scale. Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company and the U.S. Rubber Company poured resources into manufacturing over 2,500 inflatable vehicles, Shermans, jeeps and 155mm howitzers crafted from vulcanized synthetic rubber. Each unit came packaged in a crate, folded like a tent, and equipped with a compact air pump. A four-man team could assemble an entire armored column overnight, creating the illusion of strength wherever it was needed. Engineers even designed subtle imperfections, slightly uneven paint, simulated rust streaks, and tire pressure marks to ensure that aerial reconnaissance would never doubt what it saw. But deception required more than artistry. It demanded bureaucracy. Allied intelligence officers forged entire paper trails to support the phantom armies. Payroll records for soldiers who didn't exist, requisition forms for rations never consumed, and radio logs chronicling the movements of units that lived only in signal traffic. The result was total verisimilitude, an illusion so layered it fooled not only Berlin's analysts, but even some Allied logisticians. By the close of 1944, warfare had entered a new dimension where creativity rivaled firepower. Paint, rubber, mathematics, and imagination had become weapons in their own right, proof that in modern war, reality could be engineered as effectively as steel. By the winter of 1944, as the Allied advance pressed through Belgium and Luxembourg toward Germany's heartland, the Ghost Army's peculiar war entered its final and most audacious phase. What had begun as experimental trickery in Normandy was now a refined craft of battlefield illusion, honed through months of deception under fire. In December, during Operation Bettembourg in Luxembourg, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were tasked with masking a dangerously thin portion of the Allied line. To any German observer, the sector appeared heavily reinforced by the US 6th Armored Division. Convoys rolled in at dusk, searchlights flashed across tented camps, and tank noises rumbled through the forest. Yet the division was entirely air and sound, hundreds of rubber vehicles, looping engine recordings, and artful radio chatter. The ruse worked. German scouts reported a strong armored presence, and the vulnerable gap remained untouched. 3 months later came the Ghost Army's masterpiece, Operation Viersen, staged along the Rhine in March 1945. The real US 9th Army, under General William Simpson, was preparing to cross the river near Wesel. But the 23rd's mission was to make the Germans believe the crossing would occur 20 miles south. Over several nights, engineers inflated more than 600 dummy vehicles, complete with painted shadows and tire tracks pressed into the mud. Sound crews unleashed an orchestrated thunder of engines, bridge construction, and shouted commands, while radio operators mimicked the signal patterns of an entire corps. To Luftwaffe reconnaissance, the illusion was unmistakable. A massive build-up of armor and logistics pointed straight at the wrong stretch of river. The deception succeeded beyond expectation. German artillery batteries shifted north, reserves redeployed, and defensive firepower dispersed across empty fields. When Simpson's real forces finally stormed the Rhine near Wesel, they met almost no resistance. Historians estimate that the Ghost Army's diversions across Europe saved more than 30,000 Allied lives. By war's end, these artists in uniform had proven that imagination, when disciplined by precision and courage, could be as lethal as any weapon. In the crumbling twilight of the Reich, illusion itself had become an instrument of victory. By early 1945, long before the last guns fell silent, the German front lines were already haunted by something deeper than defeat, a creeping uncertainty that made every shadow suspect. Reports from captured officers spoke of entire divisions that seemed to appear and vanish like phantoms. Reconnaissance flights spotted tank concentrations that were gone by dawn, and intercepted radio traffic hinted at armies that never arrived. Patrols sent to confirm sightings found only silence and tire tracks fading into mud. "The enemy multiplies himself in the night," one Wehrmacht captain wrote in his diary, "and by morning he disappears." What began as tactical deception had evolved into psychological warfare, an invisible force that corroded confidence, command, and reason. Within German headquarters, paranoia spread faster than clarity. Analysts questioned every photograph, commanders hesitated to commit reserves, and the once disciplined rhythms of blitzkrieg gave way to caution and delay. Some divisions diverted men and ammunition against targets that did not exist, while others froze, unsure whether to trust their own scouts. The fear of illusion became a weapon more potent than artillery. Soldiers were fighting not only against Allied firepower, but against the possibility that nothing they saw was real. For the Allies, the effect was the inverse, a rising sense of control. What had begun as an odd experiment with inflatable tanks and fake radios now felt like a secret power. Troops who once mocked the Ghost Army's rubber Shermans came to regard them as silent allies capable of steering the course of battle. Propaganda units seized the idea, portraying Allied deception as proof of technological genius and moral superiority, science, intelligence, and imagination working in unison. In this new kind of war, truth itself had become negotiable. The battlefield was no longer measured in miles or men, but in perception. And perception, once conquered, was the surest path to victory. By the spring of 1945, as the Allied armies rolled inexorably toward the Rhine and Berlin, the full magnitude of their deception campaign became clear. The illusions that had begun as desperate improvisations in the deserts of North Africa now reverberated across every theater of the European war. Operation Fortitude alone had immobilized nearly 20 German divisions in northern France, forces that might otherwise have crushed the Normandy beachhead before it could expand. While real soldiers bled for every inch of hedgerow, phantom armies guarded them from afar. Hitler's insistence that Patton's fictional 1st U.S. Army Group would strike at Calais kept the Reich's most powerful Panzer units idle for weeks, their strength wasted in obedience to a mirage. The Ghost Army's tactical deceits magnified that strategic advantage. From Normandy's fields to the Ardennes forests, its inflatable tanks and sound trucks created illusions so convincing that they altered the enemy's perception of Allied strength. Columns of rubber Shermans advanced through foggy valleys, while real units slipped away to launch surprise attacks elsewhere. Bridges were built where none existed, drawing Luftwaffe strikes that fell harmlessly on canvas. By war's end, more than 20 major Allied operations had integrated deliberate visual and sonic deception into their planning. The result was a battlefield fought as much in the enemy's imagination as on the ground itself. Historians later traced how these illusions reshaped even Hitler's grand strategy. Misinformed by false intelligence, he delayed critical V-weapon offensives and misallocated dwindling fuel reserves. The deception apparatus, once dismissed as stagecraft, had matured into a strategic weapon. In their post-war reflections, generals like Eisenhower and Montgomery openly credited the deceivers, acknowledging that without their illusions, victory might have come months later and at far greater human cost. World War II had proven an unsettling truth. In modern warfare, perception could kill as surely as firepower. August 1945, peace had barely settled when the world learned that some of its greatest victories had been won not just with steel and fire, but with rubber, paint, and imagination. The truth about the Ghost Army emerged slowly, hidden behind layers of classification that would last for half a century. Its 100 veterans returned home in silence, their stories sealed until 1996, when declassified documents revealed how artists, engineers, and illusionists had turned warfare into art. What had once seemed like battlefield rumor now stood as a testament to ingenuity. Inflatable tanks, fake radio networks, and recorded soundscapes that had shaped the fate of nations. But the war's end was not the end of illusion. It was its evolution. During the Cold War, the lessons of Fortitude and the Ghost Army were absorbed into a new arsenal of deception. From the American and Soviet dummy missile fields to radar decoys and electronic jammers, the same principles of perception and misdirection guided strategies on a global scale. Britain's wartime camouflage branch evolved into permanent research divisions studying visual, electronic, and psychological warfare, proving that manipulation of perception had become as vital as any physical weapon. Even in the digital age, the echoes of those wartime illusions persist. Cyber deception, electronic countermeasures, and information warfare all trace their conceptual lineage to the Ghost Armies of Kent and Normandy. The post-war revelations redefined combat itself. Victory no longer belonged solely to those who struck hardest, but to those who controlled what the enemy believed. The legacy of those rubber tanks and phantom divisions was not just deception, it was enlightenment. The war had shown that truth like terrain could be shaped, engineered and weaponized. In every modern battlefield, real or virtual, that lesson endures. May 1945, amid the shattered cities and silent fields of Europe, the men of the Ghost Army deflated their final tanks. The war they had fought left no shell casings, no scars on the earth, only stories whispered among those who knew. Their battlefield had been built of canvas and sound, their victories measured in hesitation and misdirection. From the burning sands of El Alamein to the rain-soaked hedgerows of Normandy, illusion had stood shoulder to shoulder with steel. The Germans, outnumbered by shadows, had fought armies that existed only in photographs, reports and echoes. In the end, divisions were not just moved on maps, they were redrawn by imagination itself. As peace settled over the continent, historians began to piece together what the enemy never understood. The Great Deception campaigns, Fortitude, Bodyguard, Viersen, had changed not only the direction of armies, but the very logic of warfare. They proved that control of perception could rewrite reality, that belief could be weaponized. Those who once inflated tanks and forged radio chatter realized their contribution had been invisible, yet decisive. The Allies had learned to win not by destruction, but by persuasion, by making the enemy believe in ghosts. Years later, when the secrecy finally lifted, one veteran of the Ghost Army summarized their strange victory with quiet pride. "We won by making them see what wasn't there." Perhaps that was the war's final revelation, that in the contest between power and perception, illusion can be the sharpest blade of all.